You are listening to Viewpoints from Place Cloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
The George Inn is an absolutely gorgeous 17th century coaching inn. It stands just on the other side of the London Bridge in what would have been Southwark during the early modern period. This was an incredibly important place at the time because it is where the main route between London and Canterbury existed. Canterbury in the medieval period was extraordinarily important in the English psyche. It was the major spot of what we call pilgrimage for Catholics at the time. That's because, in particular, people would go to see the relics of St. Thomas Becket, who was buried in Canterbury Cathedral. The George Inn stands near the site of what had been the Tabard Inn. And the Tabard Inn is where the pilgrims at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales all get together and meet up. When we think about Canterbury and we think about pilgrimage, we think about travel back and forth, we're talking about a specific religious function. So people would go to confess their sins. And while they were on pilgrimage, they were under a state of what we call plenary indulgence. This essentially means that what happens on tour stays on tour. So you can't get in trouble for any particular sins that you would commit in the process of pilgrimage. That's great if you're in Southwark, because Southwark is a pleasure quarter. Southwark is where all of the medieval and early modern brothels in the city of London were located. And this is because there were rules about where you could do sex work in London at the time. Sex work was perfectly legal and it was absolutely considered necessary to the running of a functioning community, but people didn't like it to happen within city walls. So in London, the rule was that it all had to happen across the water. So it's ironic because people who would gather at the George or who would have gathered at the Tabard Inn before it in order to go on pilgrimage might have been participating in particularly sinful things before they did so. We know certainly that at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales, people are hanging around in the Tabard Inn drinking and telling each other bawdy stories, for example. So even though they're supposed to be getting ready to go on a big holy journey, they're still telling each other sex stories and cracking ribald jokes while they're packing away the beer. The George and the Tabard are also important because they're a big part of the brewing culture in London itself. Brewing beer was an absolutely essential part of early modern and medieval life. This isn't due to the fact that water was unsafe to drink. That's actually a common misconception. It had to do with the fact that people worked really hard in the medieval and early modern period. If you're doing really heavy manual labor all of the time, you want a drink that you can drink that's got calories in it. So people were drinking a lot of what we call small beer that's not particularly alcoholic, but that has lots of calories in it. It's the equivalent of sort of drinking sports drinks now. So, if you are a carpenter who's doing a lot of manual labor, or if you're a peasant who works in the field all day, you would want to be continually drinking beer just to kind of keep your calorie levels up. And that's what would happen at the Tabard and indeed the George. They're not just staging inns, they're also breweries. The ways that medieval and early modern people think about travel and themselves are very different to how we do. You could go on a religious pilgrimage and it would still be a really great time and a chance to goof off with your mates. It's not that different from how we will see, for example, hen do's or stag do's at this particular point in time. You could go get into all kinds of trouble, and by the time you got home, everyone would know that your sins were forgiven. So it was perfectly fine to hang out and get kind of drunk at an inn before you did it. Travel's changed a lot over time, and probably the way that we think about religion has. But for medieval and early modern people, religion and fun were part and parcel of the same thing. And in fact, one sort of allowed you to do the other when you were on holiday.